I'm Ellie Price, and you're listening to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcast.
Hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Just China News Pulse series. I'm your host, Gregory Wong, and in this series, we bring you the brief on the latest developments in and about China in the fields of economics, culture, and public policy. In this episode, we'll be looking at the still ongoing trade war between China and the US, the regulation of video game approval and development in mainland China, as well as the contested proposed extradition law in Hong Kong. First up, we go to correspondent Yuanjin to explain for us the May 4th movement and the importance of its centenary anniversary this year. Over to you, Yuanjin.
Thanks, Gregory. The May 4th this year is the 100-year anniversary of China's May 4th movement. That day in 1919, a student protest took place in Beijing that set off what came to be known as the May 4th movement. Soon, similar marches were held in other Chinese cities, joined by members of other groups. The demonstrators gathered in outrage over reports about negotiations underway in Versailles over the terms ending World War I. China had sided with the Allies in the First World War, and many Chinese expected that the negotiators in the post-war peace talks would agree to hand the eastern Chinese province of Shandong back to China after Japan had seized it from Germany near the start of the war. Instead, the Western power let Japan keep the territory. These decisions ignited fury among Chinese students who saw it as a betrayal by Western nations and by China's leaders, whom the student accused of bowing to Japan. Anger spread in universities and colleges across Beijing. And on May 4th, 1919, students from 13 campuses in the capital came together in protest. About 3,000 students joined the demonstration near Tiananmen Square. The students marched off to present their demands to Western diplomatic legations nearby. Protesters moved on to the home of Cao Rulin, one of the ministers they accused of acceding to Japan's demand, and some ransacked and burned it. Some protesters were arrested, but the upsurge in nationalism spread to other cities in China, inspiring strikes and boycott. The unrest forced the government in Beijing to release the arrested student, and the Chinese negotiators in Paris refused to sign the peace treaty. May 4th thus entered history as a watershed for China. Although May 4th is not a national holiday, it is a big day in the Chinese political imagination, similar to Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the United States and May 68 in France. Every year on that day, the official propaganda will memorize the historical event, and there are various kinds of local celebrations, such as local neighborhood carnivals. The year 2019 is a big year for May 4th, as the centenary, with President Xi Jinping standing in Beijing's Great Hall of the People and give a speech to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the May 4th movement. Back to you, Gregory.
Thanks, Yuanjin, especially for coming into the recording studio a little under the weather. Let's get straight to the questions then. Given that the May 4th protests of 1919 were in response to foreign powers, how is this day received in other countries? For example, is the U.S. doing anything in response?
You're right. Self-determination was one of the major themes of the movement. However, the idea of self-determination advocated in this movement did not only have an external dimension, but also an internal dimension. In 1919, there was an external demand, which was the decolonization of China's partly colonized territory. But there was also an internal demand of democracy, which called on the government to respond to the popular will. And this internal dimension of self-determination is indeed a reception of Western value, especially the Wilsonian internationalism at that time. What today's American scholars and public intellectuals are concerned about is the internal dimension of China's self-determination. You can see discussion regarding this issue at Harvard's International Symposium this year. It's called May 4th 100. And the UC Irvine history professor Jeffrey Waterstorm's article on the May 4th legacy. It's titled May 4th, the Day That Changed China. It's published in the New York Times the day before May 4th this year.
Thanks. So to link back to some of the content that you mentioned earlier with Xi Jinping's speech, so are there diverging opinions between that of the public and President Xi's speech?
Oh, great question. Well, I think there are three major aspects in his speech which deserve our attention. The first thing is the emphasis on patriotism and nationalism. The second is its depiction of the May 4th as part of the CCP's founding story. And since lots of May 4th activists are themselves Marxists, and the spread of Marxism, as well as many other Western thoughts, was the side effect of the movement. The third one is its characterization of young people as a bearer of this nationalist legacy and the party's expectation. These are all true, but did not encompass everything about May 4th. What overseas critiques care about this speech is its omission of the liberal dimension of the May 4th, especially the liberal value of democracy and political freedom.
Thanks, Yuanjin. To fill in for one of our correspondents, I have a story of my own this episode, in which I look into Hong Kong's proposed extradition bill. Unprecedented chaos ensued in the chamber of the Hong Kong Legislative Council on May 11th, as fighting broke out between rival factions during parallel meetings for the same committee reviewing a hotly contested proposed extradition bill. The scuffle left one lawmaker injured. Introduced earlier in April after 20 days of receiving public feedback, the Hong Kong government's proposed amendment bill to the city's Fugitive Offenders Ordinance and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Ordinance would allow Hong Kong to surrender fugitives on a case-by-case basis to any jurisdiction with which China does not currently have a bilateral extradition agreement, including mainland China, Macau, and Taiwan. The crime concerned would have to constitute an offense in both jurisdictions, with the final say resting with Hong Kong's courts. Hong Kong currently has signed extradition agreements with 20 countries to date, including the United States, Britain, India, Singapore, and the Philippines. The extradition bill is aimed at plugging loopholes exposed by a homicide case in February 2018, in which Taiwanese authorities were unable to prosecute a Hong Kong citizen accused of killing his girlfriend in Taiwan before fleeing to Hong Kong. Without a formal extradition agreement between the two jurisdictions, there is no formal method for Taiwan to request for his surrender to stand on murder charges. Notably, the proposed extradition law must apply retroactively for Hong Kong to surrender him. The reaction from the pan-democratic politicians of the city has been of shock and anger. As a former colony of Britain, Hong Kong was designated a special administrative region upon its 1997 handover to the People's Republic of China, as per the One Country, Two Systems framework. Under the framework, the city would have 50 years to maintain its legal system and way of life separate from that of mainland China, which some citizens and pan-democrat lawmakers are worried would be eroded by this bill. A march was held in April opposing the bill, with organizers reporting a turnout of 130,000 of the city's 7 million inhabitants, with police reporting peak participation at 22,800. Fresh in the minds of many in the city is the case concerning Causeway Bay Books, a bookstore with a reputation for selling books on Chinese politics and politicians not available in the People's Republic of China. 5 of the store's managers disappeared in late 2015, with one of the 5, Lam Wing-hee, reappearing in June 2016, claiming that he was kidnapped across the Hong Kong mainland China border and put through 8 months of mental torture. Lam has since recently moved to Taiwan, citing issues concerning his personal safety. The legal and business communities have largely reacted negatively to the bill as well, with the Bar Association calling the talk of loopholes in the current extradition law misleading. The International Chamber of Commerce Hong Kong, a prominent business group headquartered in Paris, has urged the government to abandon its controversial extradition bill, saying that the amendments to the fugitive law would force businesses to reconsider if they should locate their regional offices in the city. Internationally, the US, former colonial ruler Britain, and the EU have all expressed concern over the bill. Multiple different alternatives proposed by the Bar Association, pan-Democrats, and pro-establishment lawmakers alike have been rejected by the Hong Kong Secretaries for Security and Justice. As such, at time of recording, it is unclear how this issue will progress further. On that note, we'll be back after the break.
Chicago, the Windy City, the city of broad shoulders, the second city, is complicated.
Known for its legacies of segregation and political corruption, Chicago has a lot to grapple with.
On Chicagoland, we bring you conversations with activists, journalists, politicians, and others who are working to address these issues.
You can find Chicagoland wherever you listen to podcasts.
From University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts,
this is Chicagoland.
Welcome back. We now transition to correspondent Bing Ge to explain for us the regulations enacted regarding video game development and approval in China. Over to you, Bing.
Thanks, Gregory. Chinese game developers had mixed feelings on April 20th when China's State Administration of Price and Publication, which is SAPP, released new rules on game approvals, most of which target mobile games. Also, SAPP resumes taking new submissions, offering temporary game approval freeze from March 2018. On one hand, developers feel excited that the administration has begun granting through a backlog of applications submitted last year. In China, game publishers who want to release games must submit them to the regulator for approval, but the regulator stopped granting license to monetize online games in March 2018. According to the market research company Yuanjin, the 619 million players in China spent $37.9 billion in 2018, which makes it the biggest games market in the world. Such a freeze hurts industry and developers such as Tencent, which is the world's largest game publisher. Tencent owns the highest popular League of Legends and publishes many worldwide known games such as Fortnite and FIFA in China. These new regulations affect different actors in the industry. What may worry some of small to medium-sized game developers are the new rules under which games will undergo content vetting, and the number of games allowed onto the market will be controlled. To highlight some important changes here, first, an online game ethics committee will be established to review contents. Second, mini-games and HTML5 games, which are played on the web, will not have to go through the approval process. Prior to the launch of new rules, some mini-games and web games are related to gambling and pornography. Third, the anti-addiction system targeting children will be expanded to mobile games from PC games. Fourth, it imposes a limit on the number of games approval annually, possibly kicking out inefficiently competitive small firms from the market. Last but not least, the SAPP will refuse to license certain titles, including copy titles, poker, and mahjong. This also shows that the regulator is targeting gambling.
Thanks, Bing. So, what is it that drives the SAPP to enact these regulations by freezing the approvals in 2018 and specifically making these new rules?
Sure, I think lots of people in China who care about the gaming industry like myself, and we are not satisfied with the chaos in the fast developing games market. And I believe so did the regulator. In the past few years, mobile gaming has been a remarkable trend and dominates the industry in China. And then lots of small firms, they can enter the industry and produce a mini game in maybe just a few weeks. So this has led to being a large number of games in the Chinese market. But you can imagine if they produce in just 3 weeks, those games